This is actually in the inclusivity guide for the American Chemical Society? Are you kidding me? Alrighty. This was sent to me, or at least I was notified of this from a couple of folks that I know of in the chemistry world. The American Chemical Society has interestingly been at the forefront of this, because if you notice, there's been strikingly a lot of chemists actually that have jumped in on one side or the other with respect to DEI. And so this is your science news with this, but I read the report and I immediately have one question that's going to come up, and I hopefully will make it clear through this video. Of course, the link for this is in the description, so please go read it for yourself. I encourage you to do so with anything that I put up here, is to just go read it for yourself. This is a summary here, but there's actually some things. There's one thing in particular there's something in the report itself that I want to get into, and I also wanted to point out a couple of things linked off of the report, which strike me as bloody freaking strange, in a lot of ways. So let's see. ACS Publications, ACS being the American Chemical Society, has released its second annual diversity data report presenting current DEIR, R being respect, efforts and the demographics of its community of authors, reviewers, editors, and editorial advisory board, or EAB, members. These data enable us to identify areas where improvements in representation can be made and to track the outcomes of our targeted strategies to address inequality in our journals. I'm seeing this a lot. I think they actually mean inequity here, because they seem to cross the two of them as being the same thing when they're distinctively not. But that's a whole other thing. Summary of the report appears below. Current diversity initiatives. ACS Publications continues to make progress on the original DEIR commitments. Why not just rearrange it to say DEIR? Anyway, that's just a horrible pun off the acronym that could be written. I could also pronounce it DEIR, I think, but anyway, if I accidentally pronounce it that way, I apologize, but original DEIR commitments outlined in a joint editorial from June 2020, while also implementing several new initiatives that aim to diversity programs. Wait. Aim to diversity. Who didn't proofread? Who didn't proofread? I'm going to presume you meant diversify. Who didn't proofread? The demographic data for this report comes... wait a minute. The demographic data from this report comes, from an ongoing survey of authors, reviewers, editors, and editorial EAB members, as well as geographical data collected from user accounts from these same groups. Year-over-year changes in demographics are evaluated for statistical significance using a chi-squared. Men account for the majority of every contributor role reported upon, often outnumbering women more than 2 to 1. Non-binary individuals comprise 1% or less. The small increases from 2021 to 2022 in proportion of respondents identifying as women among authors. I'm going to get to that in a second. Editors, editorial board members, with only the increase among authors being statistically significant. 3 regions are home to the most people in the roles covered by this report. Individuals from East Asia and the Pacific make up the majority of all author categories, with a statistically significant increase since 2021, The region also contributes the majority of reviewers, Europe and Central Asia in second, and the United States and Canada in third for both authors and reviewers. Most editors and EAB members are based in the United States or Canada. Most authors, reviewers, editors, and EAB members identify as either East Asian or white. East Asian authors make up the greatest share of those submitting manuscripts, while East Asian and white authors contribute roughly roughly equal proportions of published manuscripts. Compared to 2021, 2022 saw a significant increase in East Asian, South Asian, and Middle Eastern North African authors, with a concomitant decrease in authors identifying as white. Respondents identifying as white also comprise the greatest proportion of reviewers, editors, and EAB positions. The largest share of authors, reviewers have had a doctorate for 11 to 12 years. In the future, okay. So there's a lot in here. Here's where I want to go next. This is the actual report itself. It's linked off of that page, so you can go find it fairly easily. But there's a few things in here. I make a note of this because I think this was pretty much what we just read as the executive summary here. And there's something interesting here that strikes me when I read through this. In that, how do I put this? I am wondering how ACS defines diversity. That's the real question here. Never is that stated anywhere in terms of what that actually is to them. Now, with that said, the way the language is written in this report, and it's kind of exemplified in a bunch of the stuff I just read from the executive summary, one can presume they only mean different racial, ethnic groups, different gender orientations, different sexes, different genders, all that kind of thing. Okay, fine. That's fair enough. At least you could define it somewhere. That would be my kind of thing with this. What the hell do you mean by diversity? And frankly, I would want to ask the question, are you sure that's the best definition of diversity? The other thing I want to note, before I go further into that topic, the one thing I want to note with this is that there's one thing here that's quite interesting. The Inclusivity Style Guide here for the American Chemical Society. I linked off of that, and there's a couple of things. I mean, this is just ridiculous. I actually forwarded this over to a couple of folks who I know who are journalists who get into these style guides quite frequently, to a couple of other folks, because some of these things are just crazy in here in terms of like general guidelines and things like that in terms of how you should write, right? Whenever possible, strive for a team of collaborators that reflects diverse perspectives and experiences. Those of you who watch this know I don't like the phrase lived experiences. There is no such thing as an unlived experience, so saying a lived experience is redundant. Regarding gender, race, and ethnicity, age, and geographic location, among other factors. So, I mean, yeah, something like this makes me think that that's what their primary focus is on when they're thinking about diversity, which is woefully narrow compared to what actual human diversity is. Oh, I didn't notice this before. Wait a second. Compared to what? Wait a second. Especially when writing about a group that is not represented in your writing and editing teams, consider consulting or hiring a sensitivity reader who does represent that group. These are chemists, by the way. Most of the time you presume they'd be talking about chemical formulas and all that jazz. This is chemists. Sensitivity readers are additional editors whose primary only focus is to spot and root out biased or alienating language or notions. A trained sensitivity reader can be adept at doing this work for materials that aren't related to the reader's personal identities. I don't know if a bunch of you saw in the news that apparently I think it's Puffin is the publisher of the Roald Dahl books, hired a bunch of sensitivity readers to go through and edit Roald Dahl's published works, something that he can't comment on because he's dead. are we going to do with sensitivity readers in science? I'm just, that just what? This is actually in the inclusivity guide for the American Chemical Society? Are you kidding me? I didn't even notice that before when I was reading through this. That is just crazy. Okay, I'm gonna have to remind myself to tell a few folks about that one. Oh gosh, this is crazy. This is just crazy. But the other thing I wanted to note is research has shown stereotype language can do harm. But yeah, there's a paper here that goes. So one thing I wanted to point out here is there's a paper here that goes to this this thing when it's referring to does harm with the stereotype language. The same kinds of things here. So you can find a whole lot of stuff on this page. But sensitivity readers, really, that's kind of fascinating. But let me go back to this real quick. There's a couple of interesting things here, and this is actually where I want to come back to what I started saying, because this is what they're putting forward as, you know, they did DEI training. Never mind, the DEI training doesn't actually work worth a damn, but that's published research too, you know. Let's see, ombudsperson to serve as liaison between editors and community. Developing an actionable diversity plan for each ACS journal. And it's all about increasing representation from certain things, including the diversity of, okay, here's the one I wanted to talk about, including the diversity of journal contributors as an explicit measurement of EIC performance. The data used in the creation of these reports enables ACS to track changes in the diversity of each journal's authors, reviewers, and editorial board members over time. We are identifying other metrics to benchmark progress in increasing diversity and aim to have reporting in place in 2023, which will inform the editor-in-chief renewal decisions and ACS recommendations to the Society Committee on Publications. Okay. Brother. Here's the thing. What metrics are you tracking? And this is why, again, I ask, what do you mean by diversity? If all you mean is having more people of different groups, which, by the way, awesome, go for it. I really don't care. Go for it that way. You know? But if that's all you mean, isn't that something of a very narrow and dehumanizing definition of diversity? And for that matter, let me go back to it since I have it open. From Bernard Hommel's preprint, which was republished on the Unsafe Science Substack, I keep coming back to this because it's actually a very, very, very good point that a lot of scientists who are going into this, who are dealing with this nonsense, should remember. Blindness to the multidimensional nature of diversity. Attribute groups commonly focus on the one personal feature their members share, such as gender, sex, race, or sexual orientation, and try to attract societal attention to it. That seems effective and understandable, the more so as the same individual might be involved in different activist groups to attract social attention to other possible features whenever needed. But if the same happens in science, justification is due. It is true that scientific research is always necessarily selective, and so one can always wonder whether that selectivity matters and perhaps limits possible theoretical insights and conclusions. But people, including potential participants in psychological studies, because this was written for Perspectives on Psychological Science, and, you know, the whole Fiedler on the Roof affair, you can go back and find that, differ with respect to hundreds, if not thousands, of features. Many of them have been demonstrated to affect human cognition and behavior, sex, gender, race, culture, religion, socioeconomic background, political orientation, intelligence, motivational structure and needs, learning, history, upbringing, educational style, experience, personality and traits, body size, body weight, handedness, various kinds of disabilities, cognitive styles, to name just a few. Some of them are likely to be interrelated in complex ways, such as race, economic background, and culture, country. Racial difference correlate with economic differences in some countries more than others, while others may operate independently. Accordingly, it is important to consider the possibility that some of these features or their interrelations affect behavior in a way that is of theoretical relevance, perhaps even to a degree that one would call for an adjustment or extension of theoretical models, which has been done in many studies, even though the type of features seem to underlie some seasonal changes, if not fashions, such as the great interest in societal background in the 1960s, the increasing interest in gender sex in the 1970s, the increasing interest in ecological conditions in the 1980s, with a strong emphasis on race since the 2010s. One could always do more, so that it makes sense to keep emphasizing further variables that might be interesting to study. The reason I read all this is that Hammel's point is that focusing just on one particular characteristic of a person, their race, their sex, their gender, or even just a couple of them, is wildly narrow of what human diversity actually is and what affects human behavior. That's why he looks at it as being an activist kind of thing. And that's generally the way I tend to look at it too. That if you're being woefully blind to this kind of thing. And so that's why I asked the question. What are you focusing on with diversity? How are you going to capture the hundreds of other things that are related to human diversity and the like here? So this is just crazy interesting, and I'm still blown away by the fact that they're actually suggesting you should have sensitivity readers for chemistry journals. That's just crazy. I don't see the point of doing that. I really don't, because if you're just talking about a chemistry journal, well, you're talking about chemical equations and foundational things and that. What the heck? Oh, jeez. You have to give me a better justification there. But anyway, let me know what you think. That's courtesy of the American Chemical Society. Their DEIR report. Or is it DEIR? Anyway, let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious, everybody.